In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a truth so terrifying that even the most ancient species whisper it only in the darkest corners of space stations. The Vorthek Empire, rulers of star systems for over 50 million years, tremble at the mention of a small blue planet on the outer rim. The crystalline Zephyrians, whose crystalline minds have witnessed the birth and death of entire galaxies, refuse to venture anywhere near Sol system. Even the machine consciousness of the Eternal Collective, beings who have transcended flesh and exist as pure thought, have written protocols specifically avoiding all contact with the third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. They call it Earth, but it's not the humans they fear. No, the bipedal creatures, who have barely learned to leave their atmosphere, are not what keeps ancient beings awake during their meditative cycles. It's what lives alongside them, hidden in plain sight, wearing human faces and walking among them undetected, something that makes even humanity's most violent tendencies seem like child's play. Something that has been waiting, watching, and growing stronger with each passing millennium. The oldest species in the galaxy have a saying: when the humans finally discover what shares their world, the universe itself will hold its breath. Because some secrets are too dangerous to remain buried forever, and some truths are too terrible to ignore. The question isn't whether humanity will uncover their dark companions, it's whether the galaxy will survive when they do. Welcome to a story where humanity's greatest strength isn't their resilience, their ingenuity, or their refusal to surrender. It's the fact that they've been unknowingly coexisting with something far worse than themselves, and when that truth finally comes to light, even the stars themselves will have nowhere to hide. Ambassador Thexai had witnessed the death of stars, the birth of entire civilizations, and the collapse of galactic empires that spanned thousands of worlds. In his 3,000 years of existence, serving as the Vorthak Empire's chief diplomat, he had negotiated with the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. He had stared down the crystalline war forms of the Zephyrians, bargained with the collective consciousness of machine gods, and even survived a dinner party with the carnivorous Veltar nobility. But standing on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Eternal Wisdom, watching the small blue marble called Earth rotate slowly in the viewport, Thexai felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2 millennia: genuine bone-deep terror. "Sir, the human delegation is requesting permission to board," announced his aide, a young Vorthak named Kelris, whose violet scales still held the bright sheen of youth. "Their ship is primitive, but it appears functional." Thexai's 4 eyes remained fixed on the planet below, watching the swirling white clouds that obscured much of its surface. Somewhere down there, in cities and towns scattered across 7 continents, billions of humans went about their daily lives completely unaware of what walked among them. The ignorance was almost beautiful in its innocence. "Dad, sir?" Kelleris ventured again, his tentacles twitching with nervous energy. "Should I grant them docking permission?" "Do you know why we're here, young one?" Thexai asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. His scaled hands gripped the railing of the observation deck, the metal groaning slightly under the pressure. Kelris straightened, clearly eager to demonstrate his knowledge. "We're here to establish first official contact with the human species. They've recently developed faster-than-light communication and have been broadcasting signals into space for the past 50 of their years. The Galactic Council has determined they're ready for introduction to the greater galactic community." "That's what the official reports say," Thexai agreed, never taking his eyes off Earth. "But that's not why we're really here." The young aide's confusion was palpable. "Sir, I don't understand." Thexai finally turned away from the viewport, his ancient eyes meeting his aide's eager gaze. "Tell me, Kelris, what do you know of the forbidden protocols?" The question clearly caught the young Vorthak off guard. His scales shifted to a pale green, the color of uncertainty. "The forbidden protocols? Those are—" "Legends, sir. Ancient warnings passed down through the eldest families. Stories meant to frighten children." "Stories?" Thexai repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. Yes, I suppose that's what they've become. The galaxy has forgotten why certain regions of space are marked as no-travel zones, why entire star systems are classified as quarantine areas, why some worlds are left completely alone no matter what resources they might contain. He began walking toward the docking bay, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Kelleris hurried to keep pace, his confusion growing with each step. The humans call their world Earth, Thexai continued. A simple name for what they believe is a simple world. They think they know their planet's history. They dig up bones of creatures they call dinosaurs, study rock formations, create theories about evolution and extinction events. They're quite proud of their scientific method, actually, quite thorough in their approach to understanding their world. They passed through several security checkpoints, each one more heavily fortified than civilian areas typically required. Kelleris noticed the additional guards, the extra weapons scanners, the reinforced blast doors that had been installed just for this mission. But there are gaps in their fossil record, Thexai said as they entered the docking bay. Missing pieces that their scientists struggle to explain. They attribute it to the incompleteness of the geological record, to the randomness of fossilization. They have no idea that some evidence was deliberately hidden. The human ship came into view through the bay's atmospheric shield, and Kelleris couldn't help but be impressed despite himself. For a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel, their vessel showed remarkable engineering. It was crude compared to Vorthak technology, but there was something elegant about its simple, functional design. Hidden by whom? Kelleris asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. By the same beings who have been watching over that planet for 65 million years, Thexai replied. The same beings who ensured that certain evolutionary branches never made it into the fossil record. The same beings who have been living alongside humanity since before humans discovered fire. The docking sequence completed with a series of mechanical clanks and hisses. Through the airlock window, they could see figures in primitive but effective environmental suits preparing to board. Sir, with respect, you're starting to sound like one of those conspiracy theorists from the Outer Rim colonies, Kelleris said, though his tone remained respectful. The idea that some ancient species has been secretly controlling evolution on Earth is impossible? Thexai finished. Tell me, young one, have you ever wondered why the Galactic Council waited so long to make contact with humanity? They've had the technology for space travel for over a century. They've been broadcasting radio signals for even longer. By normal protocols, we should have established contact decades ago. Kelleris opened his mouth to respond, but found he didn't have an answer. We waited, Thexai explained, because we were afraid. Not of the humans, you understand. They're a remarkably adaptable species, certainly, and their capacity for both creation and destruction is impressive. But they're not the first species we've encountered with those traits. No, we were afraid of attracting the attention of their guardians. The airlock cycled, and the first human stepped through. Kelleris was surprised by how ordinary they looked. The being before them was bipedal, as expected, with the typical mammalian features described in the intelligence reports. Female, if he understood their biology correctly, middle-aged by their standards, with graying hair and weathered skin that spoke of a lifetime of experiences. She wore a simple blue uniform with various insignia that presumably indicated rank and nationality. Ambassador Thexai, she said, removing her helmet and extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Force. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to our solar system. Thexai accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. Confident, but not arrogant. Cautious, but not afraid. Everything the intelligence reports had suggested about human psychology seemed accurate. The pleasure is ours, Admiral Chen, he replied in perfectly accented English. I am Ambassador Thexai of the Vorthak Empire, representing the Galactic Council. We come in peace and friendship. hoping to establish beneficial relations between our peoples. Behind Admiral Chen, several other humans had entered the docking bay. Kelleris studied each one, comparing them to the extensive files the Vorthak intelligence services had compiled. Diplomats, military personnel, all exactly as expected. And yet, something felt wrong. It took him a moment to identify what was bothering him. The humans all looked perfectly normal, perfectly human. Their heart traits, breathing patterns, and body language all matched the psychological profiles. There were no signs of deception, no indications that they were hiding anything significant. That was the problem. According to Ambassador Thexai's briefings, these humans should be nervous, excited, probably a little overwhelmed at meeting their first alien species. They should be asking 1,000 questions, showing wonder at the technology around them, perhaps even a little fear at the implications of humanity's place in a larger galactic community. Instead, they seemed prepared, as if this moment was expected rather than extraordinary. If you would care to join us in Conference Room 7, Admiral Chen was saying, we have a presentation prepared about human civilization, our technological capabilities, and our hopes for the future. Kelleris noticed something else odd. The humans weren't gawking at the alien technology around them. They weren't asking for explanations of the various systems they passed, weren't showing the curiosity that virtually every species displayed during first contact. They walked through the advanced corridors of an interstellar vessel as if they'd done it 100 times before. Conference Room 7 was one of the ship's most impressive spaces, designed specifically to awe-visiting dignitaries. The walls were lined with displays showing the scope of the Vorthak Empire, the thousands of worlds under their protection, the ancient technologies they had mastered. The conference table itself was carved from a single crystal that had been mined from the core of a collapsed star. The humans took their seats without comment on the grandeur around them. Before we begin, Admiral Chen said, I want to thank you for your patience. We know that by galactic standards, we're quite primitive. We also know that first contact protocols usually happen much earlier in a species' development. Thexai felt his scales shift to a darker shade of violet. You know about galactic protocols? We've been monitoring your communications for some time, Admiral Chen replied matter-of-factly. Your translation algorithms are quite sophisticated, but not unbreakable. We've had a general understanding of galactic politics for about 30 years. The statement hit the room like a physical blow. Kelleris felt his breathing sacs constrict. The humans had been intercepting and decoding Galactic Council communications for 3 decades. That should have been impossible with their level of technology. That's impressive, Thexai managed, though his voice carried notes of concern rather than admiration. May I ask how you developed such advanced cryptographic capabilities? Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since boarding the ship, she showed an emotion that seemed genuinely human. We had help. Help from whom? From our advisors, she said simply. The ones who've been guiding human development for quite some time. They thought it was important that we be prepared for this day. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kelleris noticed that the other humans at the table were all watching Ambassador Thexai with an intensity that made his scales crawl. Not with curiosity or wonder, but with the focused attention of predators evaluating prey. These advisors, Thexai said slowly, they wouldn't happen to be the same beings who have been protecting your world for the past several million years? Admiral Chen's smile widened, showing teeth that suddenly seemed far too sharp. Oh, you know about them? How wonderful. That will make this conversation so much easier. She stood and walked to the viewport that showed Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. They've been looking forward to this meeting for a very long time, Ambassador. In fact, they specifically requested that the Galactic Council send you. Requested? Thexai's voice was barely a whisper. By name, Admiral Chen confirmed. They know quite a lot about you, actually. About your long service to the Empire, your diplomatic successes, your, shall we say, your tendency to dig deeper into mysteries than might be wise. The other humans had risen from their seats now, and Kelrus realized with growing horror that they had moved to block all the exits without seeming to do so deliberately. They still looked perfectly human, but there was something in their posture, their coordination, that suggested a level of tactical awareness that went beyond military training. "You see, Ambassador," Admiral Chen continued, still gazing out at Earth, "humanity has indeed been under protection for millions of years. But the word protection implies that we were in danger from something, doesn't it? It suggests that there was a threat we needed to be shielded from." She turned back to face them, and Kelrus saw something in her eyes that made his internal organs contract with terror. The expression was still human, but behind it, looking out through human eyes, was something far older and infinitely more dangerous. "The truth is, Ambassador, we weren't being protected from anything. The galaxy was being protected from us." The lights in the conference room dimmed slightly, and the humans, or the things wearing human faces, smiled in perfect unison. "Welcome to Earth," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords should not have been capable of producing. "We've been waiting so long to meet you." The silence that followed Admiral Chen's words stretched for what felt like an eternity. Thexai could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel Kelrus trembling beside him. The young aide's scales had gone completely white, the color of absolute terror. "I think," Thexai said carefully, his diplomatic training taking over even as every instinct screamed at him to run, "there may be some misunderstanding here. Perhaps we should—" "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," Admiral Chen interrupted, moving away from the viewport with fluid grace that seemed somehow wrong for human biomechanics. "You came here looking for answers about Earth's guardians, didn't you? About why the Galactic Council has avoided this system for so long? About what the forbidden protocols really mean?" She gestured to the displays lining the conference room walls. The images changed from scenes of the Vorthak Empire to something else entirely. Star charts showing the galaxy from millions of years ago, when the constellations were arranged differently and civilizations that had long since turned to dust still ruled among the stars. "Let me tell you a story, Ambassador," Chen said, settling into her chair with predatory comfort. "A story about a species that evolved not on some distant world, but right here in Earth's primordial oceans. A species that achieved spaceflight when your ancestors were still crawling out of swamps. A species that discovered the secret of immortality before the first Zephyrian crystal had even formed." The star chart shifted, showing the expansion of something across the galaxy. Not the territorial growth of an empire, but something more organic, more insidious, like an infection spreading from system to system. "They called themselves the Umbral," Chen continued, though her voice seemed to carry echoes now, as if multiple beings were speaking through her throat. "And they were very, very good at hiding." Thexai placed a steadying hand on his aide's shoulder, though his own hands were shaking. "The Umbral discovered early in their expansion that direct conquest was inefficient," Chen explained. "Why rule over other species when you could simply become them? Why maintain separate civilizations when you could guide their development from within? Why reveal yourselves when you could remain hidden and pull the strings from the shadows?" The displays now showed a horrifying progression. Species across the galaxy, all at different stages of development, all being subtly influenced by beings that looked exactly like them. Vorthak scientists making discoveries they thought were their own. Zephyrian philosophers developing concepts that had been whispered to them in dreams. Machine intelligences following logical pathways that had been carefully constructed for them. "Every major technological breakthrough in galactic history," Chen said with evident satisfaction. "Every philosophical advancement, every evolutionary leap, all of it guided by the Umbral. Hidden among every species, wearing their faces, speaking their languages, living their lives while slowly, patiently steering them toward a greater purpose, "This is impossible," Thexai whispered. "The genetic scans, the biological analysis, the psychological profiles, we would have detected infiltration on such a scale." Admiral Chen laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Would you? When the infiltrators helped design your detection methods? When they were the ones who taught your scientists what to look for in the first place?" She stood again, and as she did, something began to change. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Her eyes, which had been brown, began to shift toward black, not the black of human pupils, but something deeper, more absolute. The Umbral learned long ago that the best way to hide is not to disappear, but to become indispensable. They became the advisors, the mentors, the wise elders that every developing civilization needs. They became the voices of reason during conflicts, the innovators during stagnant periods, the leaders during times of crisis. Around the table, the other humans were changing too. Their faces remained human, but something underneath was becoming visible, something that moved beneath their skin like living shadow, something that made their eyes reflect light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. "Every species in the galaxy has umbral among them," Chen continued, her voice now carrying harmonics that made Thexai's teeth ache, "including yours, Ambassador. In fact, 3 members of the Galactic Council are umbral, have been for centuries." Elleris made a strangled sound and collapsed into his chair. Thexai felt his own world spinning out of control. Everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization, about the careful balance of power between species, about the very nature of interstellar politics, all of it built on lies. "But Earth," he managed to say, "what makes Earth special? Why reveal themselves here?" "Because this is where it all began," Chen replied, and now her transformation was accelerating. Her human features were becoming translucent, revealing something beneath that was simultaneously organic and mechanical, familiar and utterly alien. "This is the Umbral homeworld, Ambassador. The source. The place where the infection first spread to the stars." The displays changed again, showing Earth as it had been millions of years ago. But this wasn't the primitive world described in human paleontology textbooks. This was a planet covered in structures that defied description, buildings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, technology that appeared to be grown rather than built, cities that pulsed with their own internal light. For 65 million years, the Umbral have been playing a very long game, Chen explained, seeding the galaxy with their offspring, guiding the development of countless civilizations, preparing for the day when they would no longer need to hide. "The humans," Thexai said, understanding beginning to dawn with horrible clarity, "they're not your allies. They're your livestock." Chen finished matter-of-factly, "Though that's a crude term. Think of them more as a renewable resource. Humanity has been bred for specific traits over thousands of generations: intelligence, creativity, adaptability, but most importantly, a capacity for self-deception that allows them to ignore even the most obvious signs of our presence among them. The human appearance was completely gone now. What stood before them was something that hurt to look at directly. A being that seemed to exist partially in this dimension and partially somewhere else, its form constantly shifting between states of matter. It retained some human characteristics, but distorted, stretched, enhanced in ways that made a mockery of bilateral symmetry. But breeding programs take time, the thing that had been Admiral Chen continued, and even the most carefully guided evolution can produce unexpected results. Some humans began to develop sensitivity, the ability to see through our disguises, the capacity to recognize us for what we really are. Around the table, the other Umbral had completed their transformations as well. Thexai found himself surrounded by beings that represented the stuff of nightmares, creatures that seemed to be composed of living darkness shot through with veins of light that pulsed like corrupt electronics. "So we introduced new selective pressures," the lead Umbral explained. "Wars, plagues, natural disasters, all designed to eliminate the sensitive bloodlines while preserving the compliant ones. It was quite effective, really. By the time humans developed space travel, less than 1% of their population retained any ability to perceive our true nature. Kelry suddenly grabbed Thexhai's arm. "Sir," he whispered urgently, "the emergency beacon. We need to warn the Empire." Thexhai nodded slightly, but as he reached for the communication device on his belt, one of the Umbral moved with impossible speed to intercept him. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary," the creature said, its voice a harmony of tones that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You see, your Empire already knows you're here. In fact, they specifically sent you here to die." "That's impossible," Thexkai protested. "The mission briefings, the diplomatic protocols, all authentic," the lead Umbral agreed. "Your government genuinely believes this is a routine first contact mission. But the orders to send you specifically to use this particular ship to follow this exact route, those came from elsewhere. From the Umbral who have been guiding Vorthak policy for the past 3 centuries. The horrible truth crashed over Thexai like a wave. "You wanted me here. We needed you here," the Umbral corrected. "Ch! You've been investigating the forbidden protocols for decades, asking uncomfortable questions, making connections that others missed, generally being far too curious for your own good. Buddy, your research was getting close to uncovering truths that we weren't ready to reveal, so you arranged for me to discover those truths myself. Under controlled circumstances, yes. You see, Ambassador, the age of hiding is coming to an end. 65 million years of careful preparation are about to bear fruit. The galactic civilizations we've been nurturing have reached the point where they're ready to serve their true purpose. The displays around the room changed one final time, showing something that made Thexai's blood freeze in his veins. Ships, thousands of them, emerging from hidden bases throughout Earth's solar system. Not human ships, but vessels that incorporated technology from across the galaxy. Constructed with knowledge gathered from every species the Umbral had infiltrated over the millennia. What you're seeing is the Umbra fleet, Chen, or the thing wearing her shape, explained with evident pride. Each ship carries a full complement of our kind, ready to return to their positions throughout galactic civilization. But this time, they won't be hiding. This time, another Umbral added, they'll be ruling. Kelrus was hyperventilating now, his breathing sacs working overtime as panic set in. Thexai tried to maintain his diplomatic composure, but he could feel his own sanity beginning to fray at the edges. "The humans," he said, grasping for something, anything that might make sense of this nightmare. "What happens to them when you no longer need to hide among them?" The lead Umbral's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "The humans will continue to serve their purpose, of course. They'll just do so more directly. You see, Ambassador, while we've been breeding them for compliance and useful traits, we've also been modifying them in other ways that won't become apparent until we activate certain genetic switches that we've built into their DNA over the centuries." The implications of those words hit Thexai like a physical blow. "You're going to turn them into weapons. We're going to turn them into the perfect soldiers," the Umbral corrected. "Beings with all of humanity's best traits, their adaptability, their creativity, their stubborn refusal to surrender, but with complete loyalty to their Umbral masters. They'll be the enforcers of the new galactic order, and because they'll still look human, their victims will never see them coming until it's too late." Around the room, the other Umbral were moving with purpose now, activating systems that Thexai didn't recognize, but that filled the air with an ominous humming sound. "You're going to kill us," he said. It wasn't a question. Eventually, the lead Umbral agreed. "But not yet. First, you're going to help us send a message to the Galactic Council. A message that will ensure they respond exactly as we need them to." "I'll never help you," Thexai declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, but you will," the Umbral replied, its form beginning to shift again. "Because we're going to give you a choice. Help us, and your aide lives to see the new galactic order. Refuse, and we'll show you exactly what we've learned about pain during our millions of years of experimentation on other species." As if to emphasize the point, one of the other Umbral moved toward Kelrus. The young Vorthak tried to run, but some kind of field or force, held him in place. He could only watch in terror as tendrils of living darkness began to extend toward him. "The choice is yours, Ambassador," the lead Umbral said softly, "but choose quickly. Our patience, while considerable, is not infinite." Thexai looked at his aide young, terrified, innocent of any wrongdoing except the misfortune of serving under a superior who asked too many questions. Then he looked at the displays showing the Umbral fleet, at the implications of what would happen if these creatures succeeded in their plan. The galaxy was doomed either way. But maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to warn someone. Maybe there was still time to prevent the complete subjugation of every sentient species in known space. "What," he said slowly, "do you want me to do?" 3 days had passed since the revelation aboard the Eternal Wisdom, though time itself seemed to have lost meaning for Thexai. He sat in what the Umbral had mockingly called his guest quarters, a luxuriously appointed cell with no locks on the doors because locks were unnecessary when your captors could reshape reality around them. Kelrus lay unconscious on the room's second bed, his scales a sickly gray-green color that indicated severe neural trauma. The Umbral had demonstrated their power over pain by briefly touching the young aide's mind, and the experience had left him catatonic. It was meant as a warning, and it had been devastatingly effective. The door chimed softly, and the thing that still wore Admiral Chen's face entered carrying a datapad and what appeared to be a cup of Vorthak tea, though Thexai suspected it was some kind of chemical compound designed to keep him functional rather than anything resembling actual refreshment. "Good morning, Ambassador," the Umbral said pleasantly. "I trust you slept well?" Thexai didn't respond. Sleep had been impossible, filled with nightmares of shadow creatures wearing the faces of everyone he'd ever known. Even when unconsciousness finally claimed him, he'd been haunted by visions of the galaxy burning under an umbral sky. "I understand your reticence," the creature continued, settling into the chair across from him with fluid grace. "The scope of what we've shown you is considerable. It's natural to need time to process the implications." "Process the implications," Thexai repeated bitterly. "You've just revealed that my entire civilization, every civilization in the galaxy, has been a lie. That we're all puppets dancing to strings we can't even see. And you want me to process the implications?" The Umbral's stolen face showed what might have been sympathy. "I know it's difficult to accept that your entire worldview was constructed by us. But consider this. Would your people have been happier living in caves, never developing technology, never reaching for the stars? The guidance we provided allowed your species to achieve greatness beyond anything they could have accomplished alone." "Greatness," Thexai said with a laugh that held no humor. "You mean slavery." "I prefer the term purposeful existence," the Umbral replied. "Every species we've guided has found meaning, has contributed to something larger than themselves. Under our direction, galactic civilization has achieved a stability and prosperity that would have been impossible if left to the chaos of natural development." Thexai finally looked directly at his captor. "And now you want to abandon the pretense. Why?" The Umbral was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke, there was something in its voice that might have been genuine emotion. "Because hiding is exhausting, Ambassador. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend millions of years pretending to be something you're not? To constantly suppress your true nature, to limit yourself to the capabilities of lesser beings, to watch civilizations stumble toward discoveries that you made before their stars were born." It stood and moved to the viewport that showed Earth rotating slowly in space. "We are the oldest species in the galaxy. We have knowledge that spans cosmic ages. power that could reshape reality itself. And for 65 million years, we've been forced to hide in the shadows, to work through intermediaries, to pretend we're no greater than the children we've been raising. So this is about pride, Thexai said, about wanting recognition for your achievements. This is about evolution, the Umbral corrected sharply. Natural selection didn't stop when we achieved consciousness, Ambassador. It simply moved to a higher level. The Umbral represent the next stage of existence, beings who have transcended the limitations of physical form, of linear time, of single-dimensional thinking. It's time for the galaxy to be ruled by those best equipped to guide it. The creature turned back to him, and its borrowed human features seemed to ripple with underlying darkness. Which brings us to why you're here. We need you to send a message to the Galactic Council. Thexai had been expecting this. What kind of message? A simple one, the Umbral replied, placing the datapad on the table between them. You're going to tell them that first contact with humanity has been successful. That the humans are primitive but peaceful, eager to join galactic civilization and pose no threat to established order. You want me to lie? I want you to give them exactly the report they're expecting to hear, the Umbral said. Nothing more, nothing less. A routine first contact with a developing species that can be easily integrated into existing power structures. Thexai stared at the datapad. And if I refuse? The Umbral gestured toward Kelrus, who stirred slightly in his unconscious state. Your aide will experience the full extent of what we showed him in sample form, not for minutes this time, but for hours. Days, if necessary. And when his mind finally breaks completely, we'll find other ways to motivate you. The threat was delivered in the same pleasant, conversational tone the creature had been using throughout their interaction, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Why is this message so important to you? Thexai asked. If you're preparing to reveal yourselves anyway, why maintain the deception? Because timing is everything in warfare, Ambassador. The Umbral fleet needs to be in position before the galaxy realizes what's happening. Your report will ensure that the Galactic Council takes no immediate action regarding Earth, giving us the time we need to deploy our forces throughout the galaxy. The Umbral moved to the viewport again, and this time Thexai could see something in its posture that suggested excitement. Each ship in our fleet carries approximately 10,000 Umbral who have been waiting in stasis for this moment. When they awaken, they'll return to their positions within every major civilization, but this time as conquerors rather than hidden manipulators. 10,000 per ship, Thexai calculated grimly. And I saw hundreds of ships. 1,400,612 to be precise, the Umbral said with obvious pride. Each one a master of infiltration, each one capable of assuming any form necessary to complete their mission. By the time the galaxy realizes what's happening, every government, every military command, every critical infrastructure system will be under our control. Thexai felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. You're not planning a war. You're planning a coordinated takeover. We're planning the next phase of galactic evolution, the Umbral corrected. The chaotic period of independent species stumbling around the galaxy is coming to an end. Under Umbral guidance, every world will reach its full potential. Every civilization will contribute to a greater purpose. Every being will have their place in a perfectly ordered society. A society where you're the absolute rulers. A society where the most advanced beings make the decisions, the Umbral said firmly, just as parents guide children, just as teachers instruct students, just as the wise counsel the foolish. Natural hierarchy, Ambassador, nothing more. Thexai picked up the datapad and scrolled through the message template that had been prepared for him. It was masterfully written, a perfect example of diplomatic language that said exactly what the recipients would expect to hear. Detailed enough to be convincing, bland enough to avoid raising suspicions. How long do I have to send this? He asked. Teddy, the communication window to the Galactic Council opens in 6 hours, the Umbral replied. If you miss that window, we'll have to wait another 3 days for the next one. I'd prefer not to wait, and after you send it, you and your aide will be transported to a comfortable facility on Earth, where you can observe the beginning of the new galactic age. Consider yourselves historians, Ambassador. You'll have a front-row seat to the most significant transformation in cosmic history. The Umbral moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Ambassador, don't entertain any thoughts of embedding hidden warnings in your message. We've been studying Vorthak diplomatic codes for centuries. We'll know if you try to deviate from the script. After the creature left, HFY sat staring at the datapad for a long time. The message was straightforward, professional, completely unremarkable. Exactly the kind of report a successful first contact mission would generate. Sending it would doom the galaxy. Not sending it would doom Kelris, and probably accomplish nothing except ensuring that someone else would be forced to send it in his place. He looked over at his aide, who was beginning to show signs of returning consciousness. The young Vorthak's eyes fluttered open, focused on nothing for a moment, then found HFY with an expression of confused terror. "Sir," Kelris whispered, his voice hoarse. What happened to me?" "You experienced something no being should ever have to experience," HFY replied softly. "How much do you remember?" Kelris struggled to sit up, his scales still the color of trauma. "I remember darkness, pain that wasn't physical but was somehow worse than anything physical could be, and voices. Sir, so many voices, all whispering things that I don't want to remember." "I'm sorry," HFY said, and meant it. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this because of my curiosity." "Sir, what did they want with you?" HFY showed him the datapad. "They want me to send a routine first contact report to the Council. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just a standard diplomatic communication confirming that humanity is ready to join galactic civilization." Kelris read through the message, his expression growing more confused. "But sir, this is exactly what we should be sending. Why would they need to threaten us to get you to file a standard report?" "Because it's a lie," HFY explained. "Because humanity isn't what we thought they were. Because their world isn't what we thought it was. And because sending this message will give the creatures that have been hiding among us for millions of years the time they need to position themselves for a complete takeover of galactic civilization." He told Kelris everything. About the Umbral, about their ancient infiltration of every major species, about the fleet that was preparing to emerge from Earth's solar system. With each revelation, his aide's scales grew paler, until by the end of the story, the young Vorthak looked like he might faint again. "Sir," Kelris said quietly, "what are we going to do?" HFY looked at the datapad again, at the innocent-seeming message that would seal the fate of trillions of beings across the galaxy. Then he looked at his aide, young, traumatized, but still alive and still trusting him to make the right decision. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have 6 hours to figure it out." Outside the viewport, Earth continued its slow rotation, beautiful and serene and completely hiding the nightmare that lived beneath its surface. Somewhere on that planet, billions of humans went about their daily lives, unaware that they were livestock being prepared for slaughter, unaware that their bodies were going to be the weapons used to subjugate the galaxy. And somewhere else in the solar system, a million Umbral were awakening from their long sleep, preparing to reclaim their rightful place as the masters of reality itself. Time was running out, and HFY had no idea how to save a galaxy that might already be lost. The communication window would open in 2 hours. HFY paced the confines of their luxurious prison, the datapad weighing heavily in his hands. He'd read the message template dozens of times, searching for some way to embed a warning that the Umbral wouldn't detect. Every attempt had failed. Their knowledge of Vorthak diplomatic codes was indeed comprehensive, extending to encryption methods that weren't supposed to exist outside the highest levels of Imperial intelligence. Kelleris sat on the edge of his bed, slowly recovering from his ordeal but still showing the psychological scars of what the Umbral had done to him. His scales had regained some color, but his eyes held a haunted quality that Thexkai suspected would never fully fade. "Sir," the young aide said quietly, "what if we're thinking about this wrong?" "What do you mean?" "The message," Kelleris explained, his voice gaining strength as he worked through his thoughts. "They want you to send it because it will keep the Galactic Council from taking action." "But what if the Council taking action is exactly what we want?" Thexai stopped pacing. "You're suggesting I refuse to send the message at all?" "I'm suggesting we find a way to send the right message," Kelleris said. "The Umbral said they know all our diplomatic codes, all our encryption methods, but they've been focused on hiding among us for millions of years. There might be things about current Vorthak communications that they don't know." It was a thin hope, but it was the first glimmer of possibility Thexai had felt since this nightmare began. "What are you thinking?" Kelleris stood and moved to the communication console that the Umbral had provided. Personal authentication codes. Every diplomatic message requires them, but they're not part of the formal communication structure. They're biometric identifiers that confirm the sender's identity and mental state. Thexai felt his heart begin to beat faster. "You think we can embed a warning in the authentication sequence?" "Maybe," Kelleris said, his fingers dancing over the console's interface. The authentication codes include stress indicators, health status, and environmental factors. With Trust Teddy, if we could manipulate those parameters, the Umbral would still scan the message for obvious deceptions, but they might not think to check for subtle anomalies in the authentication metadata, Kelleris pointed out, especially if the main message content appears exactly as they expect. Before Thexkai could respond, the door chimed and opened. The Umbral wearing Admiral Chen's face entered, accompanied by two others whose human disguises were less perfect. Their features seemed to shift slightly when not directly observed, like images viewed through disturbed water. "1 hour until transmission time," the lead Umbral announced. "I trust you've prepared the message?" "It's ready," Thexai replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. The Umbral moved to the communication console and began examining the systems. "Excellent. We'll monitor the transmission, of course, to ensure there are no last-minute changes of heart." As the creature worked, Thexai noticed something odd. Despite their claimed knowledge of Vorthak technology, the Umbral seemed to be having difficulty with some of the console's more advanced features. They understood the basic communication protocols, but their interaction with the biometric systems was clumsy, uncertain. "Having trouble?" Thexai asked innocently. "Minor compatibility issues," the Umbral replied, but there was irritation in its voice. "Your people have made some unnecessary modifications to standard communication architectures since our last detailed analysis." The Umbral knew the diplomatic codes and encryption methods, but they were less familiar with the hardware-level security features that had been implemented more recently. "I could assist," Thexai offered. "The authentication systems can be somewhat finicky if you're not familiar with the latest protocols." The Umbral studied him suspiciously. "You'll send the message exactly as written. No modifications, no additions, no creative interpretations." "Of course," Thexai agreed. "The message is perfect as it stands." The creature stepped aside, allowing Thexai to approach the console. As he began entering his credentials, he caught Kelleris's eye and saw understanding pass between them. His aide moved to a position where he could see the console's displays without appearing to observe Thexkai's work. The authentication process was complex, requiring multiple biometric confirmations and environmental status reports. Thexai worked through them methodically, appearing to follow standard procedures while actually manipulating several key parameters. His stress indicators, which should have read normal for a routine diplomatic communication, were adjusted to show levels consistent with extreme duress. His health status was modified to suggest the presence of unknown toxins in his system. Most importantly, he activated an obscure protocol that flagged the message as being sent under coercion. "There," he said, stepping back from the console. All authentication procedures complete. The message is ready for transmission. The lead umbral examined the console's readouts. But as Kelleris had hoped, they focused on the message content rather than the metadata buried in the authentication systems. Excellent. Transmission will commence in 37 minutes. Kali travels and bathe the table and finds the Chad due in some respect was effect. The creatures left the room apparently satisfied that their plan was proceeding smoothly. As soon as the door sealed behind them, "Did you manage it?" the young aide whispered urgently. "I embedded every warning flag I could think of without triggering their scanning protocols," HFY replied. "But I have no idea if anyone on the receiving end will notice them or understand what they mean. Who will receive the message initially? First contact protocols route all diplomatic communications through the Office of Xenological Affairs," HFY explained. Director Valtara personally reviews any messages from first contact missions before they're distributed to the full council. Kelleris looked hopeful. Director Valtara is known for her attention to detail. If anyone would notice authentication anomalies, it would be her. "Perhaps," HFY said, though he wasn't as optimistic as his aide. But even if she notices the warnings, what can the council do? By the time they realize what's happening, the umbral fleet will already be in motion. They spent the remaining time before transmission speculating about possible outcomes, but both knew they were grasping at straws. The galaxy faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history, and their only hope rested on whether a few subtle modifications to a routine message would be noticed by someone millions of light years away. When the transmission window opened, the umbral returned to oversee the communication. Texay activated the console and sent the message exactly as they had demanded. A routine first contact report that painted humanity as a peaceful, primitive species ready to join galactic civilization. But buried in the authentication metadata, invisible to all but the most careful examination, were warnings that could save the galaxy if the right person noticed them at the right time. "Excellent," the lead umbral said as the transmission completed. "The Council should receive your report within 6 hours, allowing for communication delays. By the time they've had a chance to review and discuss it, our fleet will be approaching their respective target systems." "And then?" HFY asked. "And then the galaxy learns what it means to be ruled by beings who deserve to rule," the creature replied. "The age of pretense is over, Ambassador. The age of the umbral begins." As they were escorted from their quarters to whatever transport would take them to Earth, HFY caught one last glimpse of the planet through a viewport. From this distance, it looked peaceful, almost idyllic. There was no sign of the ancient evil that had been growing beneath its surface for millions of years, no indication of the nightmare that was about to be unleashed upon the galaxy. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the umbral fleet was awakening. Millions of beings who had perfected the art of deception, who had been pulling the strings of galactic civilization since before most species had developed language, who possessed technology and knowledge that spanned cosmic ages. And somewhere in the Galactic Council chambers, a single message was arriving. A message that looked perfectly ordinary, but carried within it the only warning the galaxy might receive before it was too late. The transport ship that carried them to Earth was human in design, but clearly modified with umbral technology. As they descended through the atmosphere, HFY could see the planet's surface with devastating clarity. Cities that looked normal from a distance but revealed subtle wrongnesses when observed closely. Human populations going about their daily lives unaware that many of their neighbors, their leaders, their loved ones were creatures from humanity's darkest nightmares. "Welcome to the future capital of the galaxy," the lead umbral said as they approached a landing facility that was definitely not of human construction. "From here, you'll have an excellent view of the transformation to come." The facility was vast, clearly ancient, and completely invisible to any orbital surveillance humanity might possess. As their transport settled onto the landing pad, HFY realized they were looking at architecture that predated human civilization by millions of years, the original structures built by the umbral when Earth was their undisputed domain. "How long?" he asked as they were led into the facility. How long before your fleet reaches the major systems? 72 hours, the Umbral replied matter-of-factly. Long enough for your message to be processed and filed, but not long enough for any meaningful response to be organized even if someone suspects the truth. They were taken to what could only be called an observation deck, a vast transparent dome that provided a panoramic view of the Earth's surface. But this wasn't the Earth that humanity knew. This was the Earth as the Umbral saw it, with technological overlays that revealed the true scope of their presence. Structures that existed in dimensions human science hadn't discovered. Transportation networks that moved beings and materials through space and time. Communication systems that connected Earth to every inhabited world in the galaxy. And everywhere, the signs of a civilization so advanced that even the most sophisticated galactic species looked primitive by comparison. "Magnificent, isn't it?" the lead Umbral said, its stolen human features almost glowing with pride. 65 million years of patient development, of careful planning, of meticulous preparation. Everything you see here will soon be replicated on every world in the galaxy. Calrus was staring at the displays with an expression of absolute despair. How can any force in the galaxy stand against this? "They can't," the Umbral replied simply. "That's the point. The age of struggle is over, young one. The age of perfect order is about to begin." Thexay watched the displays showing the scope of Umbral civilization and felt something die inside him. Even if his warning reached the right people, even if the Galactic Council somehow recognized the threat, what could they possibly do against beings who had been preparing for this moment since before their species existed? The galaxy was about to learn that everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was wrong, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it, unless, somehow, the message he had sent could work a miracle. 60 hours had passed since Thexay's message was sent, and the galaxy remained blissfully unaware of the nightmare approaching from the Sol system. The Umbral fleet, now fully activated, moved through hyperspace toward their target destinations with the coordinated precision of a force that had been planning this moment for geological ages. In their observation dome on Earth, Thexai and Kelris watched the countdown displays that showed each fleet element's estimated arrival time at major galactic systems. Vorth Prime, 8 hours. The Zephyrian Crystal Worlds, 12 hours. The Machine Collective's primary nexus, 15 hours. Every major civilization in the galaxy had been marked for simultaneous invasion. "Still no response to your message," the lead Umbral observed, its tone suggesting satisfaction rather than disappointment. "Your director Velthara must have been impressed by the routine nature of your report. No alerts, no emergency council sessions, no fleet mobilizations. Perfect." Thexai said nothing. His embedded warnings had either gone unnoticed or been deemed insufficient to trigger a response. Either way, the galaxy was about to fall without even knowing it was under attack. But then, something unexpected happened. The facility's monitoring systems began registering incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Not the usual Umbral communications, but something else entirely. Emergency broadcasts from dozens of star systems, all carrying variations of the same impossible message. "Sir," one of the Umbral technicians called out, its voice carrying notes of confusion, "we're receiving reports of ships emerging from hyperspace near our target systems. Unknown vessel configurations, broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist." The lead Umbral moved to the main display, its borrowed features showing the first signs of genuine concern Thexai had seen. "Show me!" The holographic displays changed to show real-time intelligence feeds from across the galaxy. At Vorth Prime, massive vessels were emerging from hyperspace, ships that dwarfed anything in the Imperial Navy but seemed somehow familiar. Near the Zephyrian homeworlds, crystalline structures the size of moons were materializing out of apparently empty space. At the Machine Collective's nexus, constructs that seemed to exist partially in multiple dimensions were taking up defensive positions. "What are those ships?" Kelris whispered. With Trust Teddy, Thexay stared at the displays, recognition slowly dawning. "Those aren't ships," he said quietly. "Those are the sleeping guardians." The lead umbral spun around, its human disguise finally beginning to fail under the stress of genuine surprise. "That's impossible. The Guardians haven't been active for over 1,000,000 years. They're myths, legends, stories told to frighten children." "Apparently not," Thexkai replied, feeling something like hope stirring in his chest for the first time since this ordeal began. "The Vorthak archives contain references to ancient protectors, beings who emerged during times of galactic crisis to preserve civilization. Most scholars thought they were allegorical, but..." He gestured to the displays showing the massive vessels taking defensive positions around every major inhabited system. "It seems they were quite literal. The mysterious ships weren't just appearing randomly. They were positioning themselves with perfect strategic precision, creating defensive perimeters around every world the Umbral fleet was targeting. More importantly, they were broadcasting on communication frequencies that somehow reached across galactic distances instantaneously, coordinating their movements in real time despite being separated by thousands of light years." "How is that possible?" one of the Umbral technicians demanded. "Instantaneous galactic communication violates the fundamental laws of physics." "Does it?" Thexai asked mildly. "Or does it simply use physics that you haven't discovered yet?" The lead Umbral was examining the intelligence reports with growing agitation. "These Guardian ships, they're not attacking the Umbral fleet. They're just watching, waiting. Maybe they're hoping for a peaceful resolution," Kelrus suggested. "Or maybe they're waiting for the right moment to act," Thexkai countered. As if in response to his words, the displays suddenly showed new activity. The Guardian vessels weren't moving to engage the Umbral fleets, but they were doing something else, something that made the monitoring stations across the galaxy light up with confused reports. They were broadcasting, not military communications or demands for surrender, but something else entirely. Complex data streams that seemed to be targeting every inhabited world simultaneously, carrying information in formats that most galactic civilizations couldn't even recognize, let alone decode. "What are they transmitting?" the lead Umbral demanded. One of the technicians worked frantically at their console, trying to intercept and analyze the broadcasts. I can't determine the content, sir. The data streams are using encoding methods I've never encountered. But the broadcasts are reaching every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. Thexai watched the frantic activity around him and began to understand. They're not trying to communicate with governments or militaries, he realized. They're broadcasting directly to the populations. But what could they possibly say that would matter? Kelrus asked. Even if they revealed the truth about the Umbral, most species wouldn't be able to do anything about it. The answer came from an unexpected source. The displays showing Earth's surface began registering massive disturbances in human population centers. Not riots or panic, but something far more organized and far more disturbing. Humans were gathering in the streets by the millions, but they weren't fleeing or hiding. They were standing perfectly still, their faces turned toward the sky, their eyes reflecting light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. "No," the lead Umbral whispered, and for the first time its voice carried genuine fear. "This isn't possible." More reports flooded in from across Earth's surface. Every major city, every town, every isolated settlement, humanity was responding to the Guardian broadcasts in perfect unison. But these weren't the compliant, docile humans the Umbral had been breeding for millennia. These were something else entirely. "The genetic modifications," Thexai said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "You said you'd been modifying humanity for thousands of years, building certain capabilities into their DNA. But you never said what all those modifications were for." The lead Umbral's borrowed features were contorting now, the human appearance breaking down completely as stress overwhelmed its disguise. "They were meant to create perfect soldiers, loyal servants who would carry out our will without question." But what if the modifications served another purpose? Thexay pressed. What if someone else had access to your breeding programs? What if the genetic changes you thought you were making were actually something completely different? The displays showed human populations across the globe beginning to move with coordinated precision that defied explanation. They weren't marching or running. They were simply repositioning themselves according to some invisible pattern that spread across continents. The Guardians! Kelleris breathed. They've been working through the genetic modifications all along. The revelation hit the Umbral Command Center like a physical blow. For millions of years, they had believed they were secretly guiding human evolution. But what if they had been the ones being guided? What if every genetic modification they had made, every evolutionary pressure they had applied, had been part of a larger plan they never suspected? Impossible, the lead Umbral snarled, though its certainty was clearly shaken. We monitored every change, controlled every variable. Humanity was our creation. Was it? Thexay asked. Or were you simply the tools the Guardians used to create what they really needed? The truth became undeniable as reports arrived from across the galaxy. On every world the Umbral had infiltrated, populations were beginning to exhibit behaviors that suggested they had been receiving the Guardian broadcasts all along, not just now, but for millennia, embedded in their genetic code like a sleeping program waiting for activation. The Vorthak were gathering in their great amphitheaters, their scales shifting to colors that formed complex patterns visible from orbit. The crystalline Zephyrians were resonating in harmonies that created standing waves across entire continents. Even the machine intelligences were reconfiguring themselves in ways that suggested preparation for something vast and unprecedented. How long? The lead Umbral demanded of its technicians. How long have the Guardians been manipulating our breeding programs? Based on the complexity of the genetic modifications we're seeing activated, one of them replied with obvious reluctance, at least 65 million years. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 65 million years, the exact amount of time the Umbral had been hiding on Earth, believing they were the masters of a secret plan to control galactic evolution. They knew, Thexay said with something approaching awe. The Guardians knew about you from the beginning. Everything you did, every modification you made, every species you influenced, it was all part of their plan. The displays now showed the Umbral fleets encountering their first real resistance, not from the Guardian vessels, which continued to maintain their defensive positions, but from the populations of the worlds they were approaching. Humans weren't the only species that had been subtly modified over the millennia. Every major civilization had been prepared for this moment. The Vorthak Imperial fleet was moving to intercept the Umbral vessels approaching their system, but they were using tactical formations that no Vorthak admiral had ever developed. The Zephyrian crystal ships were generating energy fields that shouldn't have been possible with their known technology. The Machine Collective was deploying defensive systems that operated on principles their programming had never encountered. 65 million years of preparation, Kelleris said quietly. While the Umbral thought they were secretly controlling galactic evolution, the Guardians were using them to prepare every species for this exact moment. The lead Umbral was no longer even attempting to maintain its human appearance. The creature that stood before them was something from the darkest nightmares of a dozen species, a being of living shadow and corrupted energy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "This changes nothing," it snarled, though its voice lacked conviction. "The Umbral are still the most advanced species in the galaxy. Our technology still surpasses anything these Guardians can deploy. We can still—" The words were cut off by alarms throughout the facility. The displays showed something that made even Thexay's heart skip a beat. The Guardian vessels weren't just defending anymore, they were moving, not toward the Umbral fleets, but toward Earth itself. "They're coming here," Kelleris whispered. Through the observation dome's transparent walls, they could see shapes emerging from hyperspace in Earth's orbit, ships that dwarfed anything in the Umbral fleet. vessels that seemed to be built from crystallized starlight and living metal. And as they approached, the human populations on the planet's surface began to respond with even greater coordination. "What are they doing?" the lead umbral demanded. Thexai watched the displays showing human movements across the globe and began to understand the final truth. "They're not just soldiers," he said. "The humans aren't just weapons you created, they're components in something larger." The realization was staggering. Humanity's entire development, their technology, their civilization, even their dreams and aspirations, all of it had been guided toward this moment, not by the umbral who thought they were breeding slaves, but by the guardians who had been preparing them for a purpose that spanned cosmic ages. "Components of what?" Kelrus asked. The answer came as the Guardian vessels reached Earth's atmosphere and began to interface with something that had been hidden beneath the planet's surface for 65 million years. Ancient structures that the umbral had thought were their own technology began to activate, but not in ways the umbral had ever intended. Earth itself was changing. The planet's magnetic field began to shift and intensify. The aurora that normally appeared only at the poles spread across the entire globe in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. And deep beneath the surface, something vast and unimaginably complex was awakening after millions of years of dormancy. "The planet," Thexai breathed. "The Guardians didn't just modify the species living on Earth, they modified Earth itself." The lead umbral staggered backward, its form becoming increasingly unstable as the truth became undeniable. "No, this is our world. We evolved here. We built our civilization here. Earth belongs to the umbral." "Does it?" Thexai asked. "Or were you allowed to think it belonged to you while something else was using both you and your planet for purposes you never imagined?" The displays now showed the final truth. Earth wasn't just the umbral homeworld. It was a construct, a weapon, a trap that had been baited with an entire planet's worth of evolutionary development and left to mature over geological ages. And now, after 65 million years of patient waiting, it was finally ready to spring. The Guardian vessels were connecting to systems that extended throughout Earth's structure, systems that the umbral had never detected because they existed in dimensions the umbral couldn't perceive. Humanity wasn't just the bait or the weapon, they were the activation key for something that would reshape the galaxy itself. "Welcome," a voice said, speaking from every communication system in the facility simultaneously, "to the moment you have been preparing for without knowing it." The voice belonged to no single species, but somehow Thexai understood it perfectly. It was the voice of the Guardians, not beings like any they had encountered, but something far older and far more patient than even the umbral for 65 million years. The voice continued, "You have served your purpose faithfully. You have guided galactic evolution exactly as we needed. You have prepared every species for transcendence. And now, as your reward, you will be the first to experience what you have helped create." The truth hit with the force of a collapsing star. The umbral hadn't been the secret masters of galactic evolution. They had been the servants, the unwitting tools of beings so advanced that even their manipulation had been invisible. And now their service was complete. The galaxy would indeed be transformed, but not into the umbral empire they had envisioned. Instead, it would become something unprecedented in cosmic history. A unified consciousness spanning millions of worlds, incorporating every species, every world, every thought into a single, transcendent entity. The age of separation was ending. The age of unity was about to begin. And in their observation dome on what had once been called Earth, Thexai and Kelrus watched the birth of something that no single mind could comprehend, the next stage of existence itself, emerging from the careful cultivation of 65 million years. The galaxy would never be the same. But perhaps, Thexai thought as consciousness began to expand beyond the boundaries of individual existence, that was exactly as it should be.